Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the CCO Follow podcast. This is our final episode talking about apologetics. We've spent the past month kind of going through it. And Travis and I kind of like these little conversations that we have together. And
little wrap-ups.
Kind of some summaries. But Travis, we've talked a lot about apologetics. We've talked about, with Tad, we talked about kind of what even is apologetics. And we've talked about with Jasper, kind of the doctrine and why that's so important. Mm-hmm. We got to talk with Kirsten about postmodernism.
Just issues today.
And I guess we could just start out with, I think we know the answer to the question, but is even knowing the gospel is true, is that important to us? And I think if we kind of dive into that, we'll have a good summary of this month. Yeah,
I mean, the very first apologetic thing that most Christians will struggle with, obviously, I guess there's ones that could be considered first, like, is there a God? Stuff like that. But the one that Paul declares is that the crux of our faith is that Jesus came according to scriptures, he died according to scriptures, he was risen according to scriptures, like that, his death and resurrection, that this is something that we can know in history, that we can know based on all these different things, and that is the most important apologetic thing you could be aware of, and the most important thing you can believe in. Everything else is secondary.
Yeah.
And so
and I'm going to repeat myself probably a lot, but I just think about, as we've kind of talked more about this, the thing that really stands in my mind is like responsibility. Mm-hmm. I think all of us have a responsibility to the truth. We have a responsibility because whether we feel a certain way or not, it doesn't really matter what's actually real and in reality. We have to know that, and we have a responsibility to find the answers to that and to make a defense about that.
Yeah, it's like the Bible says that it's the glory of God to hide a matter, and it's the glory of kings to search it out. Like, part of us being made in the image of God, part of us being made human at all is this, this calling, this commission, this, part of who we are is to find truth. Ultimately finding Jesus. I mean, that was the thing that Jesus warned the Pharisees of, that they read the scriptures and in them they think they have life, but it's them that speak of Jesus. All the things that we've talked about this month and every single thing about apologetics ultimately ought to point to Jesus. Otherwise it's dead on its own. If your apologetics leads to anywhere other than Jesus, it leads to death. If it leads to anything short of Jesus, it leads to death. And it is important for us to remember what all this is about.
Yeah. Well, and there's an extremely strong argument, and there's incredible evidence for this. There's incredible evidence that the gospel is real, is true. And it takes the elimination of evidence or the disregard for certain evidences to come to a different place. Mm-hmm. And so, for us, I've just been thinking, I have not necessarily had the been in a situation yet in my life where I've needed to talk about postmodernism and kind of stand firm in the faith.
You're not hanging out with the right people.
maybe, but I have had people question: is Jesus even real? Like, did he even rise from the dead? I mean, what was that all about? Mm-hmm. And it's throughout my life, I've had the first time that happened, it was like gulp, and I had to kind of say what I knew was true, and then all the other stuff that I just hadn't, cared to look at or research, whatever, I had to actually go in and say, I gotta find more research. And the thing about this is apologetics it's a little bit for us, because we kind of talked about that with Tad, but I see it more as like apologetics is our way of seeking understanding and bridging the gap between those who have a reason why they don't believe. I think it's different when somebody who doesn't believe doesn't really have a reason. Well, okay, then you just kind of explain, hey, this is what I believe. But for those who are, well, I don't believe because I don't believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead, or I don't believe because I think the Bible is just written by man. Well, that's where we need apologetics to say, hey, well, look at this evidence. Here's the evidence that I have to help you go from this understanding to maybe you can understand where I'm coming from. I just think that's really cool. And I think, yeah, I'm learning so much, and I'm so appreciative of this month talking with Tad and Jasper and Kirsten, because it shows where I need to be responsible. It shows where I'm kind of lacking in just ignorance. And then it's kind of encouraging because it's like, well, if you guys can do it, I can do it, Yeah,
it can't be that hard. I would push back a little bit. Like, I think there's certainly aspects of apologetics that are more outward focused, like those you talk to, stuff like that. But I think a lot of apologetics is also inward focused. Like, obviously there's apologetics of just sheer doctrine. But then you have apologetics that we don't usually consider doctrine, but has massive implications on doctrine, and then you as an individual in your relationship to God. So like the problem of evil, most people wouldn't consider that a doctrinal apologetics issue, but it very much is. I mean, we're talking about God. We're talking about who God is and how he interacts with the world, and how we make sense of what we see. When you deal with a lot of different, especially the doctrinal ones, but even the ones we don't usually consider doctrinal, they impact your life. They impact how you think, how you feel, how you relate to God, who you think God is, which directly impacts your entire faith and your entire life. And so in some ways this is for other people, and in many ways it's also for yourself as well. Yeah. And so it's just being accurate. And it makes me think of one of my favorite Peanuts comics, Linus and Lucy. They were sitting at a window and it's pouring rain, and Lucy says like, oh no, it's just gonna rain. What happens if it just never stops raining and then we're all gonna die? And Linus says, oh, that wouldn't happen, because in Genesis, God says that he would never flood the earth again. Yeah. And her response is, wow, that takes a load off my mind. And Linus says, good theology has a way of doing that. And I think that apologetics is one layer of good theology that takes a load off your mind, helps bring you near to who God truly is, and just knowing him more fully, completely, so you can rest in him, so you can follow him, so you can be filled with his spirit more, and just be walking alongside of him as we're called to. And so, I think there's definitely an outside aspect, but I think there's a big internal aspect to it also. What
area of apologetics or good theology has taken a load off your mind, Travis?
Probably the biggest one, just overarching in my life, has been God's individual care for us. Verses that talk about cast your cares upon him, for he cares for you. Just this reality that he didn't spin the world and then just walked away. Yeah. That he, walks through pain and suffering, that he is present and cares and sees. Those things probably have mattered to me the most.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, for me, it's kind of a mix either between like his love for us and just his absolute like power and sovereignty. It's definitely taken a load. I'm a kind of a control freak myself. Yeah. And so when I realize, hey, it's not about what's in my control, because I really am in control of nothing.
Yeah.
It's nice to know, hey, the God who loves me also is in control of my life.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about what was kind of a favorite part for you this series of podcasts. What was kind of stood out to you?
I really liked, we had this exact same conversation with politics with Tad, but I liked so much about his just how to talk to people. So much of it is how you interact with others and desiring others to come to the saving knowledge of Jesus. And how do you do that? Because we can just become puffed up with all of our knowledge, but if it doesn't express itself in love towards, especially those who are unsaved, to bring them, to knowing Jesus, that's wonderful it's and all, useless, but it's not as useful as it could be. And it's just, So that was really good. And then it was really fun talking to Kirsten before and after about, her and Mac's love of apologetics and stuff like that. And so that's just great. That just makes me happy. It makes me think like, oh, okay, there's nerds out there. I'm not alone. This is great.
Yeah. Well, and that's encouraging too. Cause like I'm hearing you guys talk and I'm like, man, I am not doing a very good job myself at this. So it's been, and that was kind of like when Jasper came on, it was like, I realized like, wow, I really am out of my depth here. Like I'm totally out of my league, but it's like, okay, that's a good thing to know now, because now I gotta either do something about it, or if I don't, it's like, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a lot about the Christian faith. God reveals stuff and he puts it on our heart, and it's like, are we gonna do this, or are we gonna become hardened to this? Mm-hmm. And but yeah, when you were talking about with Tad, how we communicate with people,
mm-hmm.
it's not about winning an argument. And so much of, I know for me, it's like, I'm caught up in that all the time, where it's like,
absolutely.
It's like, no, like I know this, like you're wrong. Like
the times where conversations have gone the most south has been when I've given up the winning a person, and I'm just like, I don't care anymore. I just want to win this argument so I can be done. Because sometimes, and this is not right, but sometimes other people's arguments honestly are so stupid that it just makes me angry, and I just want to be done with it, because I'm like, this is idiotic and I just can't listen to this anymore. But that's not loving. That's not gracious. I mean, it's just not, and it's not reflective of Jesus. And that's when the conversations have always gone the worst.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, he literally died standing, like he could have changed people's minds.
Yeah. It was really interesting when John was teaching the Good Friday service, is I hadn't noticed before, but it said that early on in the crucifixion, when all three were there, that both the criminals alongside of him were mocking him. And it occurred to me, I was like, we always talk about how one mocked and then how one repented, but it says that both were mocking him. And it's later that the other one repents. And it just made me like pause and think, like, I wonder, like there was probably, a 2-3 hour period between both of them mocking and then one of them repenting. Wow. And just thinking about how much he was enduring all around him. But then on his mind, he's probably thinking, one of these guys is going to be saved by the end of this. Like, I just need to wait out a couple more hours. Wow. And it's just, I don't know, it's just very interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting.
And can we not suffer through conversations and willing, you know what I mean? And it's kind of, it brings it to light, kind of like Hebrews, where it's like, you have not, you have in your wage against sin, in your struggle against sin, it says, you have not suffered to the point of shedding of blood. And the writer of Hebrews is basically saying, like, what have you done to avoid sinning?
Yeah.
Not near as much as Jesus did for you to cleanse you of sin.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah.
And it's just like, can we not have these conversations?
And how often are we so impatient about our conversations with people? It's like, this person just they're not going to, I don't want to talk to them right now. They're not going to get it. I'm doing something else that's more important.
Yeah.
What's more important than a literal life? Somebody that's a relationship that you have. Like, that always, like, sometimes that happens, and I'll, like, after or midway through a conversation, I'll be like, I really am not doing anything important. This is the important thing. I need to be involved.
It's like the Good Samaritan, where like they had all these religious things to go about. They had these, quote unquote, important things to do, good opportunities, and just walking right by.
So convicting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so when we're talking about different things, we kind of have this written down. You wanted to talk about kind of these
types of doubt.
You wanted to bring up this book.
The book's okay, just to be honest. It's not. I wouldn't say everyone should read this book.
Okay, but let's talk about it. What is the book? What are we talking about in doubts? Because doubt is a very big part of that personal apologetics, is what you're saying. Yeah,
the book is fine. Just to give credit where credit's due, it's called The Thomas Factor by Gary R. Habermas.
Doubt. Interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Fun title.
Fun title. And he, the book is fine. I don't recommend it. It was fine. But I just liked how he separated the fact that you can have intellectual questions that stem from different reasons, and they need to be answered in different ways. And I think it honestly also helps people who maybe are finding themselves in a loop, especially the second one. So the first one is he talks about intellectual doubt, and it's basically this idea is Christianity true? And this is where a lot of, and that's the type of question, is Christianity true? So like intellectual doubt would be stuff like, is there a God?
Yes, sir.
Question of good and evil.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's this heady thing. It doesn't mean there's not emotions tied to it or experiences tied to it, but it's like, I just need to know an answer.
Something is reality or not reality. Yeah,
exactly. It's a on or off. You can pile up evidence on both sides and you just figure it out. And that's one type. And that's 99% of what we talked about this month was intellectual doubts. The second one, though, is emotional doubt. And he talks about, what if I'm wrong? And when I was reading this, I thought was so interesting is when we talk about apologetics, so often we focus on the things that you can truly just know yes or no. But the problem is that sometimes you will study something and you will technically have an intellectual answer, but emotionally, you're not ready to settle. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's just been like, what if I'm just wrong?
Yeah.
And there's no particular reason. Maybe even you have a reason, but piled up against the other set of evidence, it's unrealistic. You're like, this is silly. But the question is you can ask this question forever. You can ask the what if I'm wrong question forever. I remember in a philosophy class, over half the class was just, completely enthralled with the idea of what if, like, all of this is just a hoax, that there is a God, but he's cruel. And so he's essentially created this world where he gives these hints, but they're all false. And it's just like, you could say what if forever.
Yeah.
Like just that phrase, what if? And then, even Marvel, they made a million mini episodes of what if this or what if
that. They were great. That was a good show.
I didn't watch them. I don't know. But like the reality is that intellectual questions, I feel like they're in a box. And so people can be like, okay, I figured out this box. I put stuff in the box is full. Where emotional ones, especially just where it stems from what if, it can haunt people. Oh yeah. And it can make you feel like apologetics is literally never done anxiety. On a subject. Yeah.
Yeah. What if is anxiety. That's what anxiety is.
Yeah. And as I was reading this, part of me was concerned that people listening might say, okay, I'm going to delve down this road of, things I've never looked into. And I'm going to, answer the question, did Jesus rise from the dead? Did all these different things happen? Are they true? All this different stuff. When you start down that path, though, depending on your personality type, depending on a lot of different things, you might get to the end of that road, have a satisfactory answer, but then you've created an emotional question, emotional doubt that you didn't have before. And so anyone who's listening, who's like wanting to go down this journey, I don't want you to start pursuing answers, find answers, but then you're left honestly in a worse spot than you started, because now you're just throwing these what ifs because you've experienced dozens of arguments and counter arguments. You now found yourself almost desiring a counter argument, and at some point the only counter argument you have is what if I'm wrong.
Yeah. And
you can't let that consume you. That's insane.
And let's talk about faith then, because that's really that I think that's the answer for me is like, well, that's why we have faith. And
any answer you get will end up there.
Yep. And I think the thing that helps that is like is it James that talks about, those little trials and sufferings that we have actually build our faith, because what happens then is it takes it out. What if I'm wrong? That's neither here nor there. When something happened to me and God saw me through, or God did this, and it builds our faith in that. And so that's kind of what I think about.
At the same time, though, you can experience that and then doubt it later and say, what if that wasn't true, God? What if I just made that up in my head? Essentially gaslighting yourself in different ways. Like, it's just, it's very easy when we start. Apologetics is all about asking questions and finding answers. But there's some questions you simply can't answer. Like, what if I'm wrong? Yeah. Like, okay. Like, so you find the answers that you can find, and you have to let go of the answers that you can't. So he talked about that. The other type of doubt he brought up was volitional doubt. Is Christianity worth it? So this idea that how does the things that
I sure hope. Geez.
The things that you So if the intellectual doubt is like your mind, your reasoning. Emotional doubt is dealing with the emotions of what if I'm wrong. The volitional doubt is Christianity worth it? It's like, okay, you've decided this is true. You've gotten over the fact that emotionally sometimes that can be difficult. How does it practically live out in your life?
Yeah.
And these are all different layers of things we have to process and think through. But apologetics kind of forces you down that path. Because eventually, if you decide there is a God, his name is Jesus, he died and rose again from you, if you believe in him, he's put a new spirit inside of you, all these different things about our faith, you eventually get to this point of, okay, well, if I give my life to this truth, these truths that I've found, is it worth it? And
I think that's the easiest one, at least for me. It seems very easy.
It's easiest on paper, and it's hard and when rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something we just have to remind ourselves constantly is like, if this is true, then my life ought to look like this. And not just ought to in the sense of like, it's my duty. There is a certain amount of that, but like more just like, why would I choose anything else?
Yeah.
Like if I truly believe in eternity, why would I choose something else?
Well, and I think the last two doubts kind of play on each other because, I mean, at least in my experience, it's like, okay, the God who is all loving, who is all good, who provides peace that, goes beyond my understanding, that's worth it. But then, okay, I'm in a really difficult situation. I'm in a trial. I'm in a suffering. And I could go all these other different directions that immediately give me an immediate response, like maybe Band-Aids or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, in that moment, I know what is good. I know that it's worth it, but well, what if I'm wrong? Is it worth it if I'm wrong? And then, and I feel like those kind of play on each other.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
So what about for you? What has been talking about kind of these doubts? Where is like, how does apologetics, like how should we structure our learning of apologetics then to help kind of covers these? I don't know if that's what the book is about or what, but
not at all.
Oh, great.
I don't think so. Say that again.
I don't know. Like how do we address these specific doubts, these kind of types of doubts?
Oh, okay. The book is about that.
Okay.
There you go. Well, intellectual, you answer intellectually. You answer the doubt by finding the answer, by doing the research, by asking a person who knows the answer, by essentially piling up the facts on both sides and then weighing them.
Yeah. And
some of that involves, maybe possibly growing in your reading comprehension, possibly growing in your, one of the things, it's so funny that Kirsten was talking about her and Max's relationship because I'm like, oh, Alicia and I do this all the time. But like, just talk about, okay, what things are fallacies, logical fallacies? Because you might even have a lot of quote unquote facts that are true, but then applied in a false way because of a logical fallacy and things like that. So there might be some reasoning skills you have to grow in. There might be some, different aspects, but essentially you're taking the facts and you're weighing them against each other. And so that's your intellectual one. For your emotional one, in some ways you run back to your facts and allow them to comfort you. In other ways, you might want to run to other people and to just be like, I'm not crazy, right? Like, that's why God has given us community, is that, we are to build one another up. Like the Bible talks about many times, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, about, when one falls, he has others to pick him up, that a three-forward cord is not easily broken, that there's many factors that strengthen numbers and to carry one another when we're weak. And that is not just, I'm in a financial crisis, I need help, or, I need this, I need help, but also like, I'm emotionally down, I need help.
Yeah.
And to recognize that emotional answer is not going to be potentially satisfied by an intellectual one, especially when the emotional answer comes from an intellectual one. Like, you've done all this research and now you're just kind of sitting there going, but what if I'm wrong? And, and to a certain extent, depending on what the question is, you might be able to go with the, what's the worst case scenario of what if I'm wrong? And it may end up being that the consequence is very low, and maybe that brings comfort. It might be that you go to a close friend or someone, and they're like, no, like, this is true. Like, don't give up. It talks about us encouraging each other with hymns and psalms and spiritual psalms. Like, even Jesus, when he says, Peter, Satan's demanded to sift you like wheat. Don't worry, I've prayed for you. Like, just ask people to be praying for you.
Yeah.
We recognize that emotional things oftentimes are brought on by spiritual realities, but also intellectual ones. But at the core of it, there's a need for comfort and grace that only God can provide.
Yeah.
And so going to God ultimately, and also saying, God, I know these things are true. I don't feel it. And recognizing that sometimes, like you're saying about the trials, how they grow our character and faith, sometimes the trials might purely be an emotional one, that you are simply growing your character and faith, holding on to what you know is true, even when it seems dark.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. So kind of wrapping up here, what should we know about apologetics as we kind of leave this for the next thing? What should stand out the most?
I think we did a really big summation of like what apologetics is with Kirsten. But I think if just nailing it down to kind of like two things of what apologetics, like what we're doing.
Yeah.
I think the first thing is that we're rooting ourselves just in reality of like
rooting ourselves in reality. That's good.
Yeah. Like, cause you have like so many of the issues that deal with apologetics, is there a God, the problem of evil, the problem of pain, the, reality of death, like all these different things. The goal is that you would find what is reality.
Yeah.
And so like you're rooting yourself in reality. We're not living in a fairy tale.
It's almost like inspecting and discovering the firm foundation.
Yeah. And that's, when you maybe are buying a house, you pay an inspector to see like, is the foundation strong?
Yep.
Is there mold in the walls? Is like, you want to know the reality of the situation so you can address it properly. But the second thing is rooting ourselves in truth, which is really the same thing when it's like, different sides of the same coin, but more in the sense of like just doctrine, which again is reality, but just this idea that like what you experience and what they match up. And, and when I say they match up, realize that they don't always match up in the sense of you have a God who loves you, you also suffer. That's because your doctrine of God who loves you was not complete.
Yep.
There's a doctrine of suffering. There's a doctrine of like all these different things, and they do match up with the real world. And, it's just an important thing. And that's where, like taking I don't want to take an easy, cheap shot at evolution, but, just for sake of like how we're talking about apologetics talks about rooting in the real world, so like that. One of the arguments against evolution is like, okay, well, let's even just say that you can, put together all the, the chromosomes, the building blocks to continue to evolve different animals. How do you get other things like pride and courage and faithfulness and hope and desire? Like, how do you get these things that are not merely animalistic?
Yeah.
But are like kind of like beyond that. And it's kind of the same thing where it's like, that doesn't match with our reality. We experience almost tangibly courage and a desire for it and applaud when we see it. We desire honor and applaud. Like there's these things that are timeless. They've been around for centuries that people have written about and done, songs and poetry and art about and intellectually studied, and they don't match up with evolution.
Yeah.
The series of events to lead doesn't, it stops short. And that's what I mean by like rooting yourself in reality, that when we find truth will reflect what is reality.
Yep.
Because they literally, they're different sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
And so that's really what apologetics boils down to.
Yep. And I love that. Rooting ourselves in reality. Boy, don't we need that today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for having the conversation with me. And thank you so much for watching and listening. Just a reminder, all of what we covered this month, apologetics, we have resources on our follow resource page on our website. And just like any other monthly topic that we cover, it's the same thing. We have resources, tools. They're all available to you. And so if you're wanting to know something, or you have somebody in your community that you are like, wow, this is a great resources I want them to have.
Yeah.
That's where to find it. Travis, what are we talking about next month?
Next month is about stewardship.
Stewardship. Okay. Yeah. All right. That's going to be a good one. Yeah. I look forward to that.
Excited.
And so definitely join us next month as we talk about that. And as always, God bless.